You've probably heard the official version of what happened to President John F. Kennedy on that fateful day, November 22nd, 1963. They say his head was blown apart, but let me tell you, everything you've been told is a lie. You might wonder how I know this. The answer is simple. I was the president's personal bodyguard, and I know the secret he was keeping before he was assassinated. Now, I'm going to tell you what really happened that day and what information John F. Kennedy was about to make public. My name is Jack Thompson, and I was a United States Secret Service agent. For many years, I've carried a secret that has weighed on me more than my own life. I was assigned as the bodyguard to the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy, in 1960 when John F. Kennedy was still a senator with dreams of changing the country. Throughout that year, I became a key figure for the Kennedys, not just as a protector, but as a confidant in the shadows. When John F. Kennedy was elected president in 1961, my job became even more complicated. I wasn't part of the presidential bodyguard team, those men in dark suits who walked beside him at every event. My role was deeper and more essential. I was the shadow no one saw, the trusted man who was there when no one else could be. The president knew me and trusted me more than anyone else. Over the years, the weight of that trust grew. I saw more than I ever should have, heard more than I ever should have. The White House was a place full of secrets, some harmless and others that could change the course of history. It was one of those secrets that led to the president's death, a secret that only I knew in its entirety and that I've kept hidden until now for the sake of my family. I have 2 children. Raising them has been my greatest achievement after serving my country. I've protected this secret for decades, fearful of what it could mean for them if it ever came to light. But the truth is, like a ghost that haunts me night after night. Since that fateful day in Dallas, I've relived over and over the moments that led to Kennedy's death, and with each repetition, the weight of the secret becomes more unbearable. Today, at 92 years old, with nothing left to lose but my last days of peace, I've decided to tell the truth. Not for myself, but for my children. They deserve to know what their father really experienced, the reason why our country's situation changed forever. John F. Kennedy died for something more than a gunshot. He died because he knew too much, and I'm the only one left to tell what really happened. It had only been a few months since John F. Kennedy took office, and tensions were palpable in the White House. It was the night of April 20th, 1963. Everything was quiet, like any other night. I was at my post, watching the surroundings. The full moon cast long, deep shadows across the garden, and the air was cold, too cold for this time of year. Then I heard the scream, a desperate, visceral cry that I had never heard come from the president's mouth. "My God," was what I heard, followed by a thud, as if something heavy had fallen to the floor. My heart was racing as I ran towards the Oval Office. No one else seemed to have noticed. Most of the staff had already retired for the night. My footsteps echoed in the empty hallway until I reached the office door, which was ajar. I started pushing hard. I saw Kennedy standing in the middle of the room, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The president was shaking, his lips moving but not emitting any coherent sound. I approached cautiously, calling his name. "Mr. President, are you all right?" Upon hearing my voice, he reacted, but not in the way I expected. "They exist, Jack, they exist," he said in a tone of terror that I had never heard in such a strong and determined man as him. I froze for a moment. I had no idea what he was referring to. "Who, Mr. President? Who exists?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but he didn't respond immediately. His gaze turned to the window, towards the garden, and then he began to speak. He told me he had seen lights in the sky, right outside the White House. They had appeared suddenly, bright as the sun, but without emitting any sound. At first he thought it was a trick of his mind, but when he approached the window, he saw something more. "It was a ship, Jack. Huge, floating right above us," he whispered, still looking outside as if he was seeing it again. It didn't move. It just rotated silently, without making a single sound. I had never seen anything like it. I listened, trying to rationalize what he was saying. The president continued. His voice became lower, almost a whisper, laden with fear. "I heard a voice, Jack. A voice in my head saying not to be afraid, that they only wanted to improve the human race, that they would return very soon to talk about it." The president began to breathe rapidly, on the verge of hyperventilation. I knew I had to calm him down. "It must have been a hallucination, sir. You've been under a lot of stress lately, and fatigue can make one see things that aren't there," I said, trying to use a soothing tone. But inside, a part of me couldn't help but wonder if I was wrong. Years before, I had also had an inexplicable encounter on a deserted road. Bright lights, but I had never spoken about it, convincing myself that it had been a dream, an illusion created by fatigue. Could this be something similar, or was there something darker, something we didn't fully understand? Kennedy kept looking at the ceiling, his eyes empty of answers, filled only with questions that no one should ask. "They exist," he murmured again with a broken voice, "and they're going to come back." After that night of March 20th, nothing was ever the same in the White House. The nights became more gloomy, denser, as if a dark shadow had enveloped the place. Over the following weeks, I began to notice that President Kennedy was receiving unusual visitors, high-ranking people, men who normally didn't set foot on American soil without good reason. Diplomats, generals, men with cold and calculating gazes entered the Oval Office for hours and left with tense faces and tight lips. The trace of fear in their eyes was unmistakable. Although they tried to hide it, I could see that something was terribly wrong. It wasn't just the number of meetings, but the way these people left, as if they hadn't achieved what they were looking for, as if they weren't willing to accept what the president was proposing. One night, driven by concern and curiosity, I decided to ask Kennedy directly about these meetings. "Mr. President," I said in a moment of privacy, "why are you receiving these people? What's really going on?" Kennedy looked at me with a seriousness I had never seen before. His face seemed older, tired. "They're presidential discussions," Jack replied curtly. "Matters of state. It's not something you should worry about." But I knew John F. Kennedy well. His answer was a facade. He didn't want to share what was really happening, not with anyone. Weeks passed, and the intrigue grew. Every 7 days, almost like clockwork, there would be another meeting with high-profile figures, but always behind closed doors. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something the president wasn't revealing. One night, I finally decided to find out for myself. I waited in the hallway near the Oval Office, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the moment when security would relax. Then I approached the office door, trying to listen to what was being discussed inside. That night, Kennedy had met with 4 ambassadors, one from Russia, another from China, another from Germany, and another from North Korea. As I approached, I heard the whispers of the translators, words in different languages that mixed into an unsettling murmur. My ears caught fragments of conversation that chilled my blood. "This must not be made public," one of the translators said quietly, his tone imbued with urgency and fear, and then the president's voice, firm and determined. "There must be no secrets. People have the right to know what's coming." My heart was pounding as I listened. I could hear some of the ambassadors raising their voices, protesting. "We cannot share this information," one insisted, with an accent I couldn't quite identify. "If we do, we'll endanger the entire balance." Then another ambassador interrupted, his voice laden with anger. "If we continue like this, we won't get anywhere. The sound of chairs scraping and murmurs of disapproval filled the air, and at that moment I knew the meeting was ending in disagreement. The Oval Office door swung open and the diplomats exited one by one, their faces rigid and their gazes grim, as if they had been discussing the fate of the world. I quickly moved away, making sure not to be seen. My mind was buzzing with questions. What could be so important, so dangerous, that not even world leaders could agree on whether it should be revealed or not? And more importantly, why was Kennedy so determined to speak openly about it? After those tense and strange meetings with the ambassadors, the atmosphere in the White House changed palpably. The visitors who had come so frequently no longer returned. The air was heavier, and the sense of imminent danger became more acute with each passing day. I didn't know exactly what had been discussed in those meetings, but it was evident that it had been something that altered the balance of power. Furtive glances and whispers among the security staff became more frequent. It was a Tuesday, April 25th, 1961, when I received a call from the President. The tone of his voice was grave, different from any other time he had spoken to me. He asked me to come to his office immediately. Upon arrival, Kennedy was sitting behind his desk, his hands intertwined, staring into space as if he were contemplating something deep and complex. He invited me to sit down, and I knew that what he was about to tell me was not a routine conversation. "Jack," he began, with a seriousness that chilled the blood, "I've been thinking a lot in recent weeks. We can't keep keeping people in the dark about certain things. I'm considering holding a press conference, a direct message to the country about secret societies and occultism, to show our stance against these groups and their influence on the government and the world." I remained silent for a moment, absorbing what he had just said. I knew Kennedy was a brave man, someone who wasn't afraid to go against established norms. But this was something completely different. "I think it's a good idea, Mr. President," I finally replied. "People deserve to know what's happening behind the curtains." Kennedy nodded, his face serious but determined. "Tomorrow I'll issue a statement to the White House press office. If everything goes as planned, by the 27th, I'll be speaking to the entire country." As promised, on April 26th, the White House issued a statement to the press office. There was an unusual movement of journalists in the gardens and in the hallways. I could feel that something important was about to happen. The news that Kennedy would make an important announcement on the 27th spread quickly, and rumors began to circulate. Some said he would speak about the Cold War, others about internal tensions in the country, but no one was prepared for what he was really going to say. After the press conference in which he expressed his stance against secret societies, the days passed with apparent normality. However, an air of expectation and nervousness was palpable in the environment, as if everyone was waiting for the outcome of something inevitable. The security staff was on high alert, and I, in the middle of it all, felt trapped in a maze of uncertainty. Then, a few days later, around 11 p.m., I received another urgent call from the President. "It's an emergency," he said. Something in his voice made me understand that I should go immediately. I ran to the Oval Office and upon entering found the President sitting in his chair, with dim light illuminating his face. His gaze was fixed on a distant point, as if he were seeing something I couldn't perceive. "Jack, sit down," he ordered me softly. There was something strange in his voice, a monotonous tone that I hadn't heard before. His eyes seemed glassy, almost in a trance, as if he were trapped in his deepest thoughts or under some kind of influence. I took a seat in front of him, feeling my heart racing. I knew that what he was about to tell me was crucial. "There's something I need to tell you," he finally said. His voice broke slightly, and I knew this wasn't just any conversation. President Kennedy looked at me intently, his face still in that almost hypnotic state of disconnection, and said to me, Before I spoke with the ambassadors from the other countries, I was visited by them again. I remained motionless, not knowing what he was referring to, but I immediately knew he was talking about the same entities he had mentioned that night in the Oval Office. Only this time he seemed much more convinced, much more sure of what he was saying. "They presented themselves in person, Jack," he continued, his voice low but full of a strange mixture of awe and certainty. "3 of them call themselves Syrians." I felt a chill run through my body. There was no doubt in his words, no hint of uncertainty in his gaze. "They are beings of humanoid appearance," he explained. "Tall, slender, with shiny skin in shades of blue and silver. Their eyes, Jack, are large, almond-shaped. They reflect an intelligence that goes far beyond ours." I tried to process what I was hearing. "How do they communicate, Mr. President?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "They don't use words," he replied. "They communicate telepathically. They say they are peaceful, advanced in science and energy, although they show no hostile intentions. Their technology is unparalleled. They operate between dimensions. They are here because they believe that humanity can be guided towards a new era, an awakening of consciousness." Kennedy's words floated in the room, dense and heavy. I felt I was on the edge of something that went far beyond my comprehension. "Come with me, Jack," he said suddenly, rising from his seat. "I want to show you something." I followed him through a side door inside the Oval Office, a reserved access that I had rarely seen open. On the other side, there was a small meeting room, more intimate and discreet. Upon entering, I noticed a dim light and an almost overwhelming silence. Then I saw them. 3 tall, slender figures stood in the center of the room. Their skins glowed softly in shades of blue and silver under the light, as if they were from another world, which I knew at that instant was exactly what they were. "These are the Syrians," the President told me in a calm voice, pointing to the figures. I felt my breathing quicken. It was everything the President had said. It was real. One of the figures stepped forward but didn't open its mouth. Instead, I heard a voice resonating in my mind, clear and serene. "Do not be afraid, Jack Thompson. We do not come to do harm. We are here to help humanity reach its true potential. We seek to guide your race towards an era of superiority and peace." I was paralyzed. I had never felt anything like it. A voice that didn't come from anywhere but vibrated inside my head with a clarity that was almost superhuman. I could see in Kennedy's eyes that he had already experienced this. "They want to help humanity," the President explained, "to evolve its consciousness and bring the peace we so long for." One of the other Syrians, even taller and more imposing in appearance, also spoke, though without moving his lips. "We hope to reach a formal agreement that could take between 1 and 2 years of your time. To demonstrate our goodwill, we are willing to provide samples of our technology, including our weapons, so that you understand our power and how it can be used to protect and evolve humanity." I felt a mixture of fear and fascination. The magnitude of what I was seeing and hearing was unimaginable. Kennedy seemed completely convinced that this was the right path, that this alliance with the Syrians could be the key to a better future. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of deal we were about to make and what cost it would have. The meeting ended, and we left the room. I was in a state of shock. The words resonated in my head. Evolution of consciousness, superiority, weapons. I was beginning to understand what was coming. In the years that followed, I helped the President carry this burden. His confidant, as he met with these beings from another world again and again, each encounter bringing new revelations and new promises, the Syrians became frequent visitors, always in secret, always shrouded in an aura of mystery and power. My life transformed into a series of encounters in the twilight, where the laws of reality seemed to crumble But with each meeting, it became clearer that we were playing with forces beyond our understanding. 2 years passed since that first encounter with the Syrians. 2 years of secret meetings, technological exchanges, and promises of a better future. President Kennedy had become the mediator between humanity and these beings, trying to forge a new path towards peace and the advancement of our civilization. However, there was an uncomfortable truth that kept lurking. Not everyone agreed with this alliance. It was in one of those recent meetings when the president made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to do it," he told the Syrians, his tone firm and determined. "I'm going to reveal you to the world. It's time for humanity to know the truth and move towards a new era." Kennedy's words resonated with determination, but the Syrians didn't seem so sure. One of the Syrians, with its clear voice resonating in our minds, responded, "Be careful, John. There are members of your race who do not agree with this, especially those you call Russians." Kennedy smiled at the warning. "Don't worry," he replied confidently. "They may be distrustful, but they're not evil, and if they try anything, it could unleash a great war between our countries, something no one wants." The Syrians' response was simple but unsettling. "Don't be overconfident, John. Humans are unpredictable. They can be capable of anything." The beings vanished into thin air as if they were smoke dissipating. Kennedy looked at me, his face now thoughtful. "Jack, what do you think? Do you believe the Russians would really do something like that?" I maintained my firm stance. "Don't worry, Mr. President. The Russians may be our rivals, but they're also our allies on some issues. I don't think anything will happen." Kennedy nodded, apparently convinced, and so the decision was made. A few days later, on November 20th, 1963, the White House issued an official statement. They announced that President Kennedy would give an important message to the country and the entire world on November 22nd. The atmosphere filled with speculation and expectation. Rumors about a possible historic change ran like wildfire, but no one could have predicted what was really going to happen. On November 22nd, 1963, in Dallas, Texas, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated while traveling in his convertible car. The images of the moment captured the chaos and horror. I wasn't there, not in that car, but when it happened, I was the first to arrive to try to help the president. It was in vain. His head had burst. The Syrians' warning had not come true. Humanity, once again, had proven to be its own worst enemy. In the days that followed, shock and sadness mixed with guilt. I wondered over and over if we could have done something different, if my advice had led the president to a false sense of security. The nights became unbearable, and in every dream I saw Kennedy's eyes disappointed and filled with a sadness I hadn't seen before. One night, shortly after the president's funeral, I was at home, alone in the darkness. It was then that I felt a presence in the room. My skin prickled and a familiar and powerful voice invaded my mind. "You shouldn't have been so trusting, Jack Thompson," said the telepathic voice of one of the Syrians. "As always, humanity is stubborn and overconfident. With your leader's death, there will be no deal." The beings vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving me in a deeper solitude than ever. The words remained etched in my mind. I realized that I had not only failed as a bodyguard, but also as an ally of a man who had sought to change the world. Today, I live isolated from society, alone, far from my children, plunged into darkness and carrying the guilt. If only I had warned the president better, if we hadn't underestimated those who saw the Syrians as a threat rather than an opportunity, everything could have been different. Now, with time almost running out and the truth still buried, I wonder if humanity will ever be prepared to face it, or, as the Syrians feared, we will always be trapped in our own miseries and fears. As I sit here, penning these words, I can't help but reflect on the enormity of what I've witnessed and the burden of the secret I've carried for so long. The world has changed so much since those fateful days in the early 1960s, yet in many ways it remains the same. The same fears, the same conflicts, the same inability to look beyond our own immediate concerns and see the bigger picture. I often wonder what might have been if Kennedy had lived to reveal the truth about the Syrians. Would the world have embraced this new reality, or would it have recoiled in fear and denial? Would we have taken the opportunity to evolve and grow, or would we have clung even more tightly to our old ways and prejudices? There are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, and I can almost hear the voices of the Syrians in my head again. Their words echo through the decades, a mixture of hope and disappointment, of potential and missed opportunities. I think about the technology they offered us, the advancements we could have made, the wars we could have prevented, the diseases we could have cured. And then I remember the look in Kennedy's eyes when he made his decision to tell the world. That mix of determination and fear, of hope and uncertainty. I've spent years trying to understand why things happened the way they did. Was it really the Russians, as we initially suspected? Or was it someone else, someone closer to home who couldn't bear the thought of the world changing so dramatically? Were there forces at work that we never even considered, powers beyond our comprehension that saw humanity's potential alliance with the Syrians as a threat? The truth is, I may never know. And perhaps that's the greatest tragedy of all. Not just the loss of a great man, not just the derailing of a potentially world-changing revelation, but the fact that we, as a species, may have lost our one chance to truly understand our place in the universe. I've watched the world change over the decades since that day in Dallas. I've seen technological advancements that would have seemed like science fiction back then. I've witnessed the fall of old enemies and the rise of new ones. I've seen humanity reach for the stars, landing on the moon and sending probes to the far reaches of our solar system. And with each new discovery, each new breakthrough, I can't help but wonder, how much further along would we be if we had embraced the knowledge the Syrians offered? There are times when I think I see signs of their influence, hints that maybe they didn't abandon us entirely after Kennedy's death. Strange lights in the sky that can't be explained away as weather balloons or experimental aircraft. Sudden leaps in technology that seem to come out of nowhere. Whispered rumors in the halls of power about secret programs and hidden knowledge. But then I remind myself that I'm an old man now, prone to seeing patterns where there may be none, desperate for some sign that my life's great secret wasn't all for nothing. I've thought about coming forward before, about telling the world what I know. But who would believe me? An old man with an incredible tale, no proof, and a story that sounds like it belongs in a science fiction novel rather than the pages of history. And even if someone did believe me, what good would it do now? The moment has passed, the opportunity lost. The world has moved on, for better or worse. So instead, I sit here in my solitude, writing these words that may never see the light of day. I write for my children, in the hope that someday they might understand why their father was always so distant, so haunted. I write for history, in case there comes a day when the truth can finally be known. And I write for myself, trying to make sense of a life lived in the shadow of the greatest secret the world has never known. As I near the end of my days, I find myself thinking more and more about those encounters with the Syrians. I remember the awe I felt in their presence, the sense of standing on the precipice of something greater than I could comprehend. I remember the hope in Kennedy's eyes, the belief that we were on the verge of ushering in a new era for humanity. And I remember the crushing despair when it all came crashing down on that sunny day in Dallas. There are moments when I doubt my own memories. Could it all have been some elaborate hoax? A trick of the mind brought on by stress and the paranoia of the Cold War era? But then I close my eyes, and I can still see them, still hear their voices in my head. No, it was real. As real as the grief I felt when Kennedy died, as real as the guilt I've carried all these years. I wonder sometimes if they're still out there watching us. Do they look down on our planet with disappointment, shaking their heads at another missed opportunity? Or are they still hopeful, waiting for the day when we'll be ready to take our place among the stars? There are nights when I stand outside, looking up at the sky, half expecting to see their ships descending once again, but the heavens remain silent, the stars cold and distant. As I write these final words, I'm struck by a sense of both regret and hope. Regret for what might have been, for the future we could have had. But hope, too. Hope that someday, somehow, humanity will find its way, that we'll overcome our fears and our divisions and reach for something greater, that we'll look to the stars, not with fear, but with wonder and anticipation. And who knows, maybe someday, long after I'm gone, they'll return. Maybe they'll find a world ready to listen, ready to learn, ready to grow. And maybe, just maybe, the dream that John F. Kennedy and I shared all those years ago will finally come to pass. Until then, I leave this record of what I've seen and what I know. A secret kept for a lifetime, now finally revealed. To those who read this, I say, look to the stars. The truth is out there, waiting to be discovered. And when it is, remember that once, long ago, we stood on the brink of something magnificent. May you have the courage to embrace it when your time comes. This is Jack Thompson, former Secret Service agent and keeper of the greatest secret in human history, signing off for the last time. The truth is in your hands now. Use it wisely.